Hello. I'm here today because it is time for a book review. It's been a while since I did one of those, so today's the day. Today I am reviewing a fabulous book that literally fell in my lap by accident. Well, it didn't fall in my lap, it fell off the shelf. I was looking at a completely different book, minding my own business, and then lo and behold, this book decides to fall on the floor. So I picked it up and it read To Hell with Culture, Herbert Read. I took it home. Luckily, it wasn't expensive. It was $5.50. I got it from a secondhand bookstore, so that was good. I think the original price wasn't even that much. I don't think they have it on here. Anyway, so this book is a literal gem. And as I read, I understood why it fell on the floor that day. This was about 10 days ago. So yeah, I read it and here I am about to review it. So I looked up who Herbert Read is, and I'm just going to read what they wrote on Wikipedia. Sir Herbert Edward Read was born December 1893 and died in June of 1968. And he was an English art historian, poet, literary critic, and philosopher, best known for numerous books on art, which included influential volumes on the role of art in education. And he was also the co-founder of the Institute of Contemporary Arts. In this book, he begins by saying that artists are, in the time that he wrote this book, which was, I think the first publication was 1963, that artists were considered psychotic and that they required cures. But he also says that we can't say that because artists are of all types of personalities. Some are introverts, others are extroverts, some are depressed, and others are schizophrenic, etc., etc., etc. And usually the artist is someone who offers something to the community that the community does not want to accept. So that's what he labels as an artist. And then he goes on to talk about a democracy. And he said, democracies cannot allow self-possessed humans, those who think that they are bigger, better, stronger than others, because a democracy means we are all equal. So you can see why I found this book right now. Oops. Uh-oh, I have some messages coming through. Let me just turn those off. Sorry. It's like a whole group chats that need to be muted. Okay, I should have seen that coming, but that's okay. Anyway, back to the book. So then he says that an artist has the capacity to make art from different desires, emotions, his or her fears and fantasies, and that is where the artist's greatness lies, in their ability to transform those desires and emotions and fears and fantasies into actual art. And in his opinion, culture, or the world culture, just belongs to the past. Now, in this time when he's writing the book in 1963, I guess the reason being that culture has been stripped off of what makes it unique. He says that ever since democracy was invented in Athens, we have had a struggle with the anomaly of the artist, as there is no role for one in an egalitarian community. And the collection of essays in this book will answer questions like, what separates the artist from the rest of humanity? And what is the artist's contribution so that he can be tolerated? What? Artists need to be tolerated. I don't know, maybe there is still some of that vibe in the air. It's a conversation to have with some artists. Whoever wants to have one with me, get in touch. Anyway, perhaps the artist is physically unique, but then that means that every human is a special kind of artist. However, if art is a skill, then a man must do something so well that he deserves that title. And the Greeks had no words for culture, but the Romans were the ones that were credited with making culture into a commodity. So that's where we see that culture begins to become capitalism. And for Reed, capitalism means the loss of integrity of the thing that is created, because to sell, all kinds of prices must be available. Example, distressed furniture to make it look like it's antiques. And then he adds, to hell with culture. He adds to that, to hell with the artist, saying that art as a separate profession is merely a consequence of culture as a separate entity. I don't know, my cat is talking. So if you hear noises in the background, that'd be him. In a natural society, no one is privileged with the title artist. Everyone is an artist. Something to think about. That's actually my thing. I've always thought that everyone is an artist, and I'm on a mission to help everybody remember that they're an artist. So another reason why this book just happened to be in my way. I don't know, synchronicity, what it is, something is trying to tell me something. Then he goes on to say that to actually have what we can call culture, we need to be able to produce beautiful pots and pans, and that must begin with education. And it's not just any education, it's the education of the senses. Or as he calls it, education of the sensibility, but also it got me thinking that the senses correspond to the 5 elements. I don't know, my mind thinks that way, so I kind of linked it with the 5 elements. I'm like, oh, okay, so educating people on the senses means bringing in the 5 elements, and I guess Ayurveda is relevant after all. When you think about it, it's engaging the senses, educating about the senses in the world. So then in chapter 3, he calls it the politics of the unpolitical. The unpolitical are those who want to serve, not for personal gain, but for just merely the idea of serving. And he gives the highest example as Christ. And he has a number of other examples in there. So he just goes on to like expand on this notion in chapter 3. In chapter 4, he calls the cult of leadership, which he basically is talking about fascism, which, to be honest, I had to kind of skip around in this chapter a few pages because, well, let's face it, I know what fascism is, or I think I do. Anyway, he concludes this chapter with the idea that the good artists should be the leaders. An idea that actually originated with Pluto. Not Pluto, Plato. Pluto too, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, which brings up the question for me, who is a good artist? And he attempts to answer that question in chapter 5, where he says that a good artist is someone who has been educated on good design and basically who can intuitively and instinctively produce their artwork. He says that there's a problem with education, because how can we educate someone to appreciate harmony and rhythm when they are actually living in an ugly environment or on an ugly street? So education is not enough in the ugliness and the chaos of the industrial age. So that's actually a very, very good point. But I think that there is a way around that, because for me, I actually see beauty in the ugliness. So there's beauty everywhere. There's never anything that does not have its inherent beauty, according to my philosophy. Another point that can be discussed with some of my artist friends out there. Hello. Feel free to write on this video and comment and talk to me about this. I'll be happy to converse with you. Then chapter 6, he discusses what bad taste in art is. And I'm going to quote, actually, from chapter 6, was it, that we're on? Chapter 6. Oh, the symptoms of decadence, he calls it. So he starts it with a quote by Voltaire. "I implore you to tell me how a people that has so many philosophers can have so little taste." Oops. Then there's another quote, which is a little longer, by Delacroix. "You seem to be surprised that philosophy, enlightening the mind and rectifying ideas, should have so little influence on the taste of a nation. You are quite right, and yet you will have observed that manners have even more empire over taste than have the sciences. It seems to me that in the matter of art and of literature, the progress of taste is more dependent on the spirit of society than on the philosophic spirit." So basically in this chapter, he's saying that that's kind of like what brings art's downfall is bad taste. But again, I don't really agree with him on these points. And that's something to be like expanded on at some point, maybe not, I don't know. Then chapter 7, another quote that struck me, and it's by Vincent van Gogh. This chapter is called "The Collective Patron." And the quote is, "One of the reasons why I am out of employment now, why I have been out of employment for years, is simply that I have other ideas than the gentlemen who give the places to men who think as they do." Having been unemployed for a while, I kind of resonate with this quote. I mean, I am self-employed, but still like barely self-employed at this point in this pandemic. So there's that. Then chapter 8, he talks about what determines a successful artist. And I'm not going to go into details into that. You'll have to read the book if you can get your hands on it. I think it's available, actually. I looked it up. It's still in print somehow, or there are some used copies cycling around. Chapter 8 is the secret of success. And I think he says that sensibility is the secret of success and art education, but it can't just be any art education. He has like certain criteria. One of them is having good taste. I don't know. He really emphasizes that concept of having good taste. And then what if someone just doesn't have good taste? I don't know what you can qualify as good taste and bad taste, because everybody has the taste that they have. It's kind of like, I like this kind of food, but I don't like that kind of food. And anyway, chapter 9 is called "The Freedom of the Artist," and he expands on the notion that there are not one types, there is not one type of art, and that, or one type of artist, and that each one is unique in their way that they produce their artwork. Then in chapter 10, The Nature of Revolutionary Art, he talks about the art of a classless society. And I think that's what he hopes that at some point we will reach, in a place where the products that we are making are not catered to certain classes. So like if somebody can only afford this kind of furniture or this kind of cutlery or whatever it is, that it would all be great works of art that everybody can actually use. Or they would all have the equal integrity and not be mass produced and made from, what is it, like less, like materials that are less valuable, I guess. Then there was a chapter that struck me. So we were chapter 10, and then, chapter 11, before that one that struck me, is called The Psychology of Reaction. And in this, he discusses when artists turn against each other because of jealousy. And that's a very detailed chapter. I guess it happens, and he gives an example of the Dada art and how some artists quit their art making just because they got jealous that they weren't producing as good art as their comrades. So then chapter 12, and actually these are collections of essays that were each, and he writes this at the end, that each one was written at a different time for a different reason, and then he collected them into this book. So they're really not chapters, but they're like individual topics that he kind of arranged in this way. And then so chapter 12 talks about the problem of pornography, which I thought was really striking because I actually dealt with that in the book that I just published. But for me, it was from a different angle, despite the fact that we kind of say similar things. So I actually want to read what he wrote. And it's like the first paragraph in this chapter. He says, I propose to limit my considerations of this difficult subject to the discussion of the following four propositions. The first one is pornography is a social problem. It is a commodity brought into existence by certain characteristics of a highly developed civilization. Secondly, the problem cannot be solved by any form of prohibition or censorship. These forcible methods merely aggravate the disease, and there are other deplorable consequences. And thirdly, prevention is better than cure. By diagnosing the psychological motives of those who produce and those who consume pornography, we may be able to sublimate the instincts involved. And then number 4, any form of censorship, political or moral, inhibits the development of spiritual values. Morality itself is strengthened by liberty. Then in the chapter, he goes on to say, I'm not going to read the entire chapter, I promise, but these are pretty striking words. In pornography, a visual or verbal image acts as a direct stimulus to the erotic drives or impulses which are always latent and ready to be stimulated in normal people. There are pornographic images that are too crude or too obscure to have the required effect. They are just bad of their kind. Good pornography implies adequate artistic skill. And this skill may be so great that it provokes the well-known argument of artistic justification. So like, in other words, that we can justify it just because it's so well done, and it has this like inherent art feeling to it that you look at it and you're like, wow, that's a piece of art. But then the underlying theme is pornography. So he thinks that that presents a problem to society, and I would agree. If you read my book or read my book, you'll see where I stand on that. I'm not going to get too much into it. And then chapter 13, art is a way to progress without which we cease to exist, is the whole main topic around that. If we want to progress, we have to make art. Otherwise, it's the end of humanity. But I think also this pandemic might be the end of humanity. Oh gosh, don't mind me. Chapter 14, the debate between art and science, is what he talks about. And he says that despite it being useful, science and technology can destroy sensibility. Duh. Yeah, I would agree on that. Thank you, Herbert Read. And then chapter 15 is another one that I want to quote from. The title of this chapter is The Arts and Peace. And I'm just going to read the first quote that he has on here, and that'll be a wrap for today's book review. It's kind of a little longer, but that's okay. The task of art is enormous. Through the influence of real art, aided by science, guided by religion, that peaceful cooperation of man, which is now maintained by external means, by our law courts, police, charitable institutions, factory inspection, and so forth, should be obtained by man's free and joyous activity. Art should cause violence to be set aside. And it is only art that can accomplish this. Leo Tolstoy was the one who said these words. Wow, right? Art is the only thing that can accomplish violence to be set aside. Okay, wow, this is a great book. I'm glad it landed in my way, and I'm glad I actually bought it. And hey, artists out there, we have a huge mission ahead of us. All right, that's a wrap for this book review. I hope you find the book and read it, and please engage with me in the comments. I'd love to have a conversation, or write to me, or hey, maybe we'll have a conversation in person at some point once we're back into real life, I guess. Now it's just surreal life. All right, take care. Until next time, bye-bye.